Thank you, Margot, and thanks everyone on the line for joining us. So I'm not known for brevity, and we have a lot of material to cover in half an hour, so we're going to get right to it, hopefully. Here we go. Secure collaboration in the MBE environment. There are 5 topics here that I would like to walk through. For those of you who may not be familiar with MBE, just a very brief introduction, a discussion of how the requirements for collaboration change as we move into a more MBE TDP environment, a discussion of how we might address some of those, and then a discussion of our ITI DEXcenter product that can be used for collaboration for both MBE and even pre-MBE, and then finally, as Margot said, a Q&A session. So first, what is MBE? There's a lot of acronyms that fly around, MBX something. MBD is usually equated to model-based definition, and the notion is that instead of having a two-dimensional drawing, you now put more information into the 3D model, including the annotation, product manufacturing information, or GD&T, depending on the CAD system you may be using. So you don't have a drawing anymore, everything's in a 3D model. And then the next evolution of that is to be able to use that 3D model throughout your enterprise for various operations and with your suppliers. So, you know, the idea of reusing data and doing that through the whole enterprise. So MBE, model-based enterprise. Some people may call this digital thread. That's another equivalent topic that gets, or buzzword, I guess. A key to that you saw kind of buzzing around was a technical data package, or TDP. A TDP is not necessarily new to MBE. That's something that's been around for a while, but I think within the TDP changes, that the idea is we're going to package all this information together into a TDP and then send that around. And we'll talk more about what those contents are, et cetera, later. This is a slide that's been around for a few years. I think I first saw it at a NIST MBE TDP summit from Paul Wong or somebody, that kind of lists the levels of capability for MBE. So there's really, I'd say, I don't know of anybody that's at level 6 that has everything automated and full, but a lot of people are moving through the ranks 2, 3, 4, or whatever. So you probably are not at level 6. No offense to anyone, but most of you are probably looking at, you know, what some level is and where to get there. And Margot, I think you're going to ask a question.
I have a way. I've distilled it down a little bit into a poll. We don't have the levels there per se, but I did break this into a few categories. So everybody weigh in. Let us know where you are in the process. Maybe you're just in the research phase. Possibly you're planning your MBE strategy. Maybe you're already in the process of implementing, or you're nearing completion, like John said. If there are MBE masters on the line and you truly think you're a level 6, maybe you can go ahead and ring in with that. Looks like we have about half of everyone's rung in. I'll give you a couple more seconds here, and then we're going to close the poll and share the results with everyone. Okay. So it looks like the majority of our audience is in the process of implementation at 38%. 25% are still planning, 25% are just in the research phase, 9% of people are nearing completion, and sure enough, 3% of people said they are masters. So that's good. Feel free, those folks, feel free to ring in on the questions too. Send us some information for our Q&A. We would love to hear about your experiences. So. Okay,
that's about what I would expect, I think. So now let's move on to, you know, how does the MBE environment affect collaboration? And I've broken out kind of 4 different areas: process, content, accuracy, and security to talk about, and how it affects each one of those. So we'll look at those one at a time. So certainly there are differences in process, and I've labeled these pre-MBE and MBE. Of course, you know, there's a range of things, but you know, at one point in time, we primarily exchanged drawings. The supplier got those, reviewed them. They were never used directly for downstream. In fact, the end application that your supplier might be using might require them to create a new model. They might have imported a neutral file that you sent them, but they would use that data. In the MBE world, okay, now we're going to start using some of those models directly downstream. So things that were maybe ambiguous over here need to be removed and made not ambiguous over here. And the modeling techniques become more important too. So sloppy modeling, tolerances need to be related to the techniques and things that you're using downstream. So more attention paid to that. Another big change is in how you convey engineering change orders, ECOs. In the the pre-world here, typically someone would take a drawing and mark it up, either paper or electronically, and identify what needed to be changed. That becomes a little more difficult in the 3D world, so it's a little harder to mark up those 3D models. We'll talk a little bit later about what some people have done in the past to do that, but it's certainly something you need to consider. And then there's the content. So, content up to now has largely been a neutral file, perhaps, not a lot of detail, maybe some instructions. As we get into MBE deliverables now, we have, first of all, more files, and those files have more intelligence in them. So typically, Mill Standard 31000, for instance, typically calls out including a native model, a neutral model, a visualization model, some validation models. So there's several files that are included, and because there's more content in each of these get to be bigger and bigger files, which is also a consideration. And of course, the age-old problem of when I share CAD data with my suppliers or partners, can they use it? Can they read it? Can they work with it? Do they have issues? So those don't go away. They just get even more complicated now that we have PMI to worry about. So accuracy is another issue. Again, the pre-MBE world, we're not using the model directly, so if it's not as accurate, perhaps that's okay. But in the MBE world, where we are using perhaps derivative files, it's very important that both the geometry and the annotation, if we're trying to use the PMI content, needs to match as well. So if you're, for instance, going to use a downstream application for inspection, you wouldn't want the annotation to be different in the model that you receive to work on than before. So, and some of you have probably experienced this in the past. Suppliers may have gotten your drawing or model, and those ambiguities we talked about, the supplier felt like they knew what you meant and just changed it. They may have discussed it with you. They may not. It may not have been what you really meant. You may end up with some problems downstream. So again, this gets into making sure that you don't have ambiguities and any derivatives match that. So, of course, derivatives. So security is a big issue, and it becomes particularly more important with an MBE environment. In the past, if you were sending a neutral format, that's kind of a partial representation. It doesn't have as much data in it. With the MBE world, again, you're sending more data. The data is more comprehensive. It's more valuable to you. It's more valuable to a competitor or somebody that you don't want to get a hold of that. So it's important to look at the security aspects of exchanging these more robust technical data packages.
John, we could do one more
do another poll.
Yeah, I'm going to launch one. This one asks, how do you predominantly handle supplier data exchange? So are you just pick one. I know you might do multiple, but pick the one you use the most. Is it email, a customized supplier portal, PLM system, manual paper-based, or you don't know? That's also an option. We'll give you guys just about 20 more seconds to ring in, and then we will share the results, and you can know where you're at with the rest of the audience. Okay, I'll close the poll here. In this case, 64% of people are using a supplier portal, 17% are using email, 11% with PLM, and right around 9% for the rest. So very good. And actually, yeah, John, you have a result from last webinar that we did in December.
This was from a while back. It sounds like more people are getting away from email. That's good because email is not inherently secure, and also email typically has file size limit. So, and then customer supplier portal seems to have grown PLM systems. Certainly there's issues with directly letting people into your PLM system. But all the accuracy of the security of those really depend on how your system is set up. So, all right. So how do we address these new collaboration requirements? Let's talk about a few of those. So, ideally, you would like to have a mechanism to automate as much of that process as possible. So, the processes that you need, the generating the right content, making sure it's accurate, and of course sharing it securely. You would like to have that tied into your PLM system because that's typically where your data resides. And you probably need to support multi-CAD unless all your suppliers are using the same CAD system, which is not all that common. So that's where our DEXcenter product comes in. So DEXcenter is an infrastructure that provides both a collaboration portal capability, a secure collaboration portal, and a process automation engine. So DEXcenter predominantly manages the execution of other applications, so different CAD systems, different translators, ITI products, and whatever, and ties into PLM. So it's a way to do this. So let's look at how DEXcenter fits for these different areas we talked about. So for process, we talked about the need to make sure that your models can be used downstream, that someone can manufacture from them, that it could be producible. And for documenting model changes, ECOs, how do we do that? So CAD-IQ is another ITI product which we have enabled through DEXcenter, and it lets us do a couple of these things. So a couple examples. Here's a case of a producibility problem. The hole here is too close to the edge to be manufactured without having some breakout. So that's something that may or may not have been noticed by inspection, but using an automated, a programmatic approach, we can identify that. And then on the area of ECO documentation, if you want to convey how to, in this case, how to change a hole size, this allows two models to be placed side by side so you can see what the changes are. In an earlier project we were involved in, some of the suppliers, the OEM and the supplier, literally spent days and weeks trying to document this. The OEM engineers would make screenshots and type in comments on them. The supplier would go through the models in great detail, making sure they understood what the changes were before they would bid on the changes and whatever. So using a programmatic approach here greatly reduces the time and improves the reliability, because we found some cases where unintended changes weren't noticed. And so if you're looking for changes, you look for the things you expect to change, but otherwise you might miss them. The derivatives, of course, we talked about needing more derivatives. So, instead of just generating a single step or IGES file, that we're now talking about a visualization file, maybe some other files to go with it too. So DEXcenter provides a capability to generate the various derivatives that you need to put into TDP. It can do that using a variety of different translators, the native CAD translators themselves, as well as ITI's CADFix product, which can directly translate from native models to STEP or IGES JT. We support the Anarch translator, for instance, to generate 3D PDFs. And the structure of DEXcenter is such that if you have your own favorite translator, that can be plugged in as well. So all that can be automated to generate these different derivatives. And then, of course, validating those derivatives. Again, it's important that all the derivatives are accurate. If you send a derivative to someone to work with and it's not accurate, in this case, again, if you're trying to inspect this part, you're going to find out it doesn't match because the annotation is different. So we can, again, generate that automatically. On the security aspect, there's the whole process of creating and managing the technical data package. You want to do that in a secure environment. You want to deliver that securely. And if you do have export compliance, requirements. You want to make sure those are met, and to the extent you may need to prove those, you have to have compliance reports available, as well as intellectual property. So all those are considerations as part of the security aspect. So security is really not just one thing. You know, some people think, well, I'll lock my house and it's secure, but you really need to put multiple levels of security. I like to think of peeling an onion. We have different layers. So the more layers you have, the more obstacles you have to someone getting access to your data. So let's talk about a few of these that are enabled through DEXcenter for security. First is the architecture. DEXcenter uses a JEE enterprise architecture, so it's typically deployed at an enterprise level. Most of the IT organizations and large companies are very familiar with that and very comfortable with that as far as securing and maintaining the security of the application itself. DEXcenter itself is distributed. So here we're showing that the DEXcenter main application, which is where users interact, is in a DMZ zone, but everything else is back inside an intranet zone where it's more secure. And you know, there's a variety of different ways to do that. Authentication, most larger companies like to use an LDAP or SSO authentication. They have fewer things to manage and they can enforce the various rules and whatever. So DEXcenter complies with all that. We mentioned the export authorization and IT protection. So these are functions which can be turned on or off depending on what you want, and it can be done for different users. If you're sending data to someone in a foreign country, you might want to turn on certain aspects. If it's, you know, a partner of your own company inside the U.S., you might not care, for instance. So you might not need to do this. So, but DEXcenter has a vehicle for allowing you to specify tech codes, the ECCN or ITAR codes that are required, along with licenses that go along with it, and to provide that information to the end recipient who's receiving the data. So this is included in email that's sent to the recipient. It's also included with the file itself when it's delivered. And as I noted, the database contains this information so it can be audited. And the same is true regarding proprietary information agreements, confidentiality agreements, whatever you call them. People have different names for them, but DEXcenter can ensure that if you're sending data to someone and you don't have a PIA that is valid for the current date and time, that it's going to block that. So someone has to go fix that before you can send it. So again, all that's managed in our database. There's also an approval function. Again, something you can turn on or off depending on how you want to do this. Some of our customers want all data that is being sent outside to be to go through a third-party approver, just to make sure someone isn't sharing data they shouldn't be sharing. So there's a process that can be enabled to require a user to identify the project they're working on and who in that project is authorized to do the approval, and they can review what's being sent, make sure that it has all the proper export control and proprietary information with it, and then approve it or send it back to the user if it's not. And that can be dynamic based on, you know, given things like maybe you're sending it to, again, to a non-U.S. company, for instance, versus a U.S. company. So that was pretty quick. But you know, that is really what we've tried to put together as a DEXcenter TDP server, an automated system to go through these various functions, be tied into PLM, provide multi-CAD capability. Just kind of a real quick DEXcenter at a glance, and I won't go through these in detail because we don't have that much time. But you know, the enterprise architecture, so JEE. The typical multiple components of database workflow, being scalable, having an SOA capability, and being able to connect to PLM. It could also be used interactively without PLM, you know, directly from web pages. The secure managed file capability, you know, encryption while things are exchanged, being able to package things together into a TDP, notify people of email, you know, when it's available. And we talked about approval, proprietary information, etc. Also unlimited file size. So again, that becomes a bigger issue when you start dealing with some of this MBE data. We've had customers send multi-gigabyte files through DEXcenter quite successfully. Of course, it depends on the infrastructure you have behind it. So, and then the automating processing engine, we showed you some of those. There are other things that can be automated as well, but generally if you can run something in a batch or quasi-batch mode, it can be automated in DEXcenter and built into an overall process. So ROI, there are a number of ways to look at you know, how this can save money. You know, often companies have a designer or engineer exchanging data with one of their suppliers, and it may not seem like there's a lot of time involved in doing that. It may, you know, maybe it takes 15 minutes, maybe it takes half an hour. That doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start multiplying that by literally thousands of data exchanges or tens of thousands, then that becomes a lot of time. It's a big time, and overall it's going to delay getting your products to market faster. It's also going to take time away from your designers, engineers, and making better products. So it's not the best use of their time. If you are not providing good data that your suppliers can use, that will, you know, result in them having to spend more time with your data, which means they're going to charge you more to work with you as a supplier. Also, the idea of license usage, because this is a server-based, enterprise server-based product, you might be able to use fewer licenses, but use them better, keep them busy more around the time instead of having these expensive licenses on everybody's desktop. The quality aspects of this, you know, certainly if you have issues with the product you're producing, whether it resulted from bad modeling or bad design, or it resulted from these unauthorized changes maybe a supplier made because they couldn't quite use your model as is, that can become expensive. The further downstream you find that, the more expensive it is to have engineering change orders to change that. So being able to identify these things up front can be a big money saver. Compliance, we talked a bit about compliance. If you do have requirements for any kind of export control compliance, if you do not fulfill those, you can be subjected to fines, which can be quite large. You can also lose contracts because of that. So a lot of cost that can be associated with that. And finally, intellectual property. You know, you've got the best product on the market. You want to make sure you stay with the best product on the market. You don't want anyone else, you know, learning from you how to make their product better to be more competitive with you. So those are just some. There are certainly other aspects that can be considered too. Here's a quick case study. This was a project we did a few years ago from the Department of Defense and the Air Force Research Lab called Customer Supplier Interoperability, CSI. And it was targeted at looking at a large Department of Defense program, in this case the F-35. We were partnered with Lockheed Martin, Honeywell, and Rockwell Collins is all participating in this. And we were able to pretty easily look at being able to save $50 million a year, probably a lot more than that, but we were all pretty comfortable with that number, through automation and better processes that we were using to do some of this. And with a project like this that might exceed over 20 years, guess what? That's $1 billion. So those are some pretty significant numbers. So where do you go from here? We talked at the beginning about what MBE is and that there are different levels of MBE. So I've showed you in this webinar some of the functionality specifically related to really kind of a full MBE type implementation. But even if you aren't there yet, if you're at the lower levels of MBE, there's a lot of functionality here that can be used. And you may have different modes of operating with different suppliers, so kind of a hybrid thing. As I noted earlier, it can be used with or without PLM. So you can start as a standalone application and grow into PLM. And you can really do this in phases. So we have, one of our largest customers spent a number of years basically using DEXcenter to provide secure transmission with export control. And they literally exchange multi-terabytes of data per year, tens of thousands of exchanges with their customers. They've moved into automating more of the MBE-related functions, some of the validation, producibility, and whatever, so to make that more efficient. We have another large customer that is using DEXcenter only as an automation engine, so they're not using it all for transmission. They're using it just to automate half a dozen specific functions that are part of their process for delivering models. Both of those customers I mentioned have moved into tying into PLM, being able to export data from PLM, import certain results back into PLM. And one thing I didn't mention, DEXcenter has an SOA capability, so typically these PLM connections are utilizing an SOA methodology to do that. So,
great.
And with that, I'll open up for questions.
Yeah, in fact, a couple of them, if you want to back up one slide, John, a couple of them tie in here. Someone asked, as far as the proprietary information protection, what form does that take? Is it just a watermark or something more effective?
No, at this point, it's one, not letting someone send data if they don't have an agreement. So it's kind of tracking your agreements and making sure they're okay. Right now it is, well, we've done a couple different things for different customers. So the typical out-of-the-box capability is just to send a notice with the file. But for another customer, we've actually been able to open up a native model and a step model derived from that and actually put that into the model. So we've had some discussion with other customers about being able to do that in a PDF file, for instance, of adding that to the TDP to put that information on it.
Okay, great. Now I have another question here. Can DEXcenter turn on things such as ANARC translation or a CAT-IQ check during the wind chill workflow process without much needed interaction from a person?
Sure. So the idea here would be that, well, if I go back, well, try to find a slide here. If I go back to here, see if that one will show. It's not going to show that one. Bear with me. There we go. So on this slide, for instance, we're showing the PLM system over here. And I've really indicated two capabilities, an ad hoc trigger, so a user can launch something from a PLM system, but it could also be a lifecycle trigger. So a lifecycle trigger, could say, okay, I've got a new model, I need to go validate it, or I need to do a producibility check, and it could do a number of those things independently. Typically, all of these things aren't going to get done all in one big workflow. They're going to be pieces that are built up over time. So yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, great. And then connected to that, just a question. It was the graphic that showed all the applications that can plug and play with DEXcenter. We called out ANARC, but also PDF translator. Can you just explain the difference between that for the audience?
Well, I mean, ANARC is probably the best known capability to generate PDF, but there are other vendors that have PDF capability, and we do some PDF generation ourselves. For instance, to make a TDP package, we can do that ourselves, or we can use ANARC.
Great. And a related question to that chart where we had a few different CAD systems plugging into DEXcenter, that was just a graphical, suggestion. Someone asked, do we also support SolidWorks? And we do. We support every major CAD system. Yes. So couldn't fit them all on the screen there. Another question here, John. For companies with hundreds of programs, how efficient is the process of customizing the workflow for TDP based on program requirements?
One of the things that we have certainly built into DEXcenter is the ability to customize it. So we try to recognize the sort of things people want to do and to be able to change those. So Anytime we execute any of these applications that are used, for CAD-IQ to do checking, for Anarch or whatever, Anarch uses different recipes. The CAD systems have different configs and whatever, so it's simply a matter of changing that particular configuration. And we can have multiple configurations. You might want to do one thing with one partner or supplier and something different with a different partner or supplier. So it's quite easy to go in and change those configurations.
Great. Another question here. Does DEXcenter provide digital rights management, including time-limited access and access revocation?
No, that's something we haven't done yet. That's it's been a topic of discussion with various customers that do that. It's certainly something we could entertain doing if that's of interest to somebody.
Very good. And as far as the PLM integrations go, is there already a 3D experience integration available?
We don't currently have a, by 3D experience, you're talking about CATIA, I believe.
Inovia. Yeah, Inovia.
Yeah, we do not have one. We've had customers that have integrated with Inovia, but we have this SOA toolkit that we use for integration. We have one that's available for Teamcenter, and we're certainly willing to work with folks to generate one for Inovia. And the way we do that, we usually find that everyone has different schemas and processes for their PLM system, so it's been hard to have an out-of-the-box capability. So we have an out-of-the-box capability, which is this SOA toolkit. There's some pieces we can provide with that to help you get going, and then you can, your staff can generate the ability to extract the data from your PLM system and use the DEXcenter SOA. As I mentioned, we did that for another customer recently. We've actually implemented a Teamcenter integration, so we actually have that one that we could share with people.
Related to that Teamcenter comment there, someone asked if anyone that we know uses DEXcenter instead of, for example, the dispatcher functionality in Teamcenter PLM.
Yeah, Teamcenter has a number of different ways to export and process things. One of those is dispatcher. Another is a direct SOA, a Teamcenter SOA capability. And yet a third is something called TCIF. So there are different ways of doing it, and yes, we have customers using all of those. So even with the dispatcher, one of our customers used dispatcher to basically launch DEXcenter. So that kind of refers to getting the data out of Teamcenter or getting out of the PLM system. And then you have several methods to be able to launch DEXcenter and control the operations that you're doing. They're very compatible. We've tried to very intentionally make them very compatible.
Okay, very good. I know we've run over time and we do have a few more questions. People that have sent questions, we will certainly follow up with you after this webinar, make sure we get all of your questions answered. John, thank you for your presentation. Right. And feel free to reply to the email I send out, everyone on the line, if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you.